Good evening, everyone. My name is Anita Verna-Crofts, and I am the Associate Director here at the Communication Leadership Graduate Program at the University of Washington. On behalf of ComLead, I'd like to welcome you all to the first of our student-run COVID Consultancy's 5-part speaker series titled Communication and Connection in the Time of COVID. Our topic tonight is mindfulness and well-being in times of crisis. We're competing with a really beautiful evening here in Seattle, but maybe some of you are joining us from the outdoors, a perk of our current reality. A few announcements before I introduce our special guest. First, we are recording tonight's conversation. Second, if you have the bandwidth, technologically and psychologically, please do turn on your camera, as it's always great to see everybody on the screen. Third, during the audience Q&A session, please type your questions in the chat box, and our Zoom DJ, Mo Herbert, will then collect and pose questions to Melissa for a portion of our time together. Speaking of Melissa, on to the main attraction. Our guest tonight, as you all know, is Melissa Schwartz. Melissa splits her time between the two Washingtons and is joining us today from the East Coast, Washington, D.C. She is the Chief Operating Officer for the consulting firm, the Bromwich Group, where she leads the crisis communication and public affairs practices. 3 years ago, Melissa joined the ComLead faculty and built our first crisis communications course. It's become one of our most popular classes, and this is a testament to Melissa. She's a terrific teacher, but I think it's also a testament to how crucial the topic is, and our students know it. And now in the time of COVID, more than ever. Those of you who know Melissa are aware of the pace of her days, given the business that she's in. So Melissa, after a grueling week, you should be kicking back with a bottle of wine, but you're joining us here. So thank you for sacrificing your well-deserved Friday happy hour. So let's begin. Thanks to the folks who submitted questions in advance over our partner platform, Thought Exchange, as I've incorporated many of them into my questions to kick off the evening. Melissa and I are going to speak for a little bit, plan to leave plenty of time for questions from all of you, and we'll aim to wrap between 6:45 and 7 with a call to action from Melissa. So, all right, let's get down to it. Melissa, you and I have been having conversations now for going on 4 years. Two transplants who found themselves in the Pacific Northwest going, why is everyone talking so slowly? What is wrong with everybody? So we'll try to monitor our speed tonight. Melissa and I have a tendency to accelerate when we're around each other. So let's start with a question that you and I thought would set the stage really well, and it turns out it's also a question that surfaced in the Thought Exchange, so that's very apropos. And to start us off tonight, I'd like to hear how you define personal and professional mindfulness and well-being in the context of this talk.
Well, thanks, Anita. It's pouring rain in DC, so I'm so jealous that everybody is having such beautiful weather in Seattle. I love to see, I'm seeing so many familiar faces of former students and colleagues. So this is awesome. This is a great opportunity. So thank you for that. So mindfulness, right? Personal and professional mindfulness. Anyone who knows me is questioning how I'm possibly talking about mindfulness. I will say, if you have a yoga mat out right now, roll the puppy up, because that is not what we are doing tonight. The definition of mindfulness is really about being centered in yourself and having presence, being aware of your limitations and where you are, and accepting your feelings and limitations and vulnerability. And that's really what I see when we talk about mindfulness and self-care. As practitioners, as communications practitioners, I think we are most effective when we are calm, when we are clear-headed. Really, that's where we're at our best. And that's true. That was true before coronavirus, but it's even more true now. We are not at our best when we're panicked. We are not at our best when we're exhausted. And we're not at our best when we have puppies running around and children running around and partners running around. And so I think it becomes really important in our jobs to maintain mindfulness, to figure out where we are at any given time as we are sort of entering into the world and into our profession. I think of communicators as the gatekeepers. We the buck kind of stops with us, right? How something gets communicated, no matter how much time and effort our colleagues or our bosses might put into something, we're the ones who are getting it out there into the world. And so I feel like in many cases, it's our responsibility to make recommendations to our organizations about how they communicate with employees, how they engage consumers, how they protect the brand. And I'm seeing so many instances right now where that is not happening, or that is happening poorly. And I think that reflects as much on the practitioner, on the communicator, on the social media administrator, as it does the person who came up with that idea. The other thing that I would say is that I feel like a lot of times people say, well, I know this isn't a crisis, but, or I know I don't have a right to be stressed out right now, but I am. And I want to disabuse people of thinking that. You're allowed to be stressed out, even if you are not sick, even if a loved one is not sick, even if you still have a job. Spending time wondering how you're feeling is real is, I think, a waste of your time and energy when it should be spent on trying to get yourself centered and get yourself back on track. I think that a crisis, and for those who have taken my class, you've heard me say this, I think a crisis is anything that knocks you off your game. It's anything that throws off your priorities. It's anything that sends you into disarray. It's a glitch on a video camera while you're trying to lead a Zoom. It's a child who runs out naked in the middle of a conference call. It's any number of those things, right? That is a crisis for you, and you're entitled to feel like it is a crisis, or to feel like what you are going through is valid and is worthy of your time to get centered again. I often tell clients that if something feels like a crisis to them, it is. I've worked on some big crises, and sometimes people say, well, it's not this, but, and it's like, stop, right? You don't have to compare yourself with something that made national news. It's sucking for you. You're in it and you need help. And that's what I'm here for. And it doesn't really matter how big a scale it is. How I respond to you might matter. The kind of tools in the toolbox that we throw at that problem might vary, but your feelings are valid. And I think part of being an effective crisis communicator, particularly now, is figuring out what those tools, not whether or not it's a crisis, but what are the tools we're going to use? How appropriate or relevant might be the tools that you're going to use?
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say, sorry, I'm long-winded. The last thing I'll say, Anita asked about sort of personal and professional. And when I think of self-care, which I actually think is really important, I do think of it both personally and professionally. Personally, that may mean trying to get some sleep, taking a break, taking stock of how you're feeling. Personally, giving yourself 2 more minutes to digest the thing that was just sent to you in an email before firing off something that you are absolutely going to regret tomorrow morning that you've sent to someone. Professionally, I think some of the dumbest requests have been made during coronavirus. I speak from experience. I think that there are some things I have been asked to do or to say or to pitch that do not make sense. And that reflects on my personal brand. If I go forth and do something that I know is wrong and I've attached myself to it. So sometimes, getting dragged into those decisions can affect you. And that can be pitching non-newsworthy events to reporters. It can be creating tone-deaf advertising or social media. It can be putting ideas into writing instead of in person, because you can't meet in person, that will haunt you later on. And so I think that becomes really critical and really important. I have people who work for me who each practice self-care in different ways. Some log on later in the day because they need to actually sleep. They need to deal with their family. Others take a break in the middle of the day. And it's important for me as an employer to be able to let that happen and to give them space to be able to do that and to find where those moments are where they need that space.
Yeah, I know you've said to me that in order to manage crises effectively for anybody else, you have to make sure that you're in a position of the level of equilibrium and self-care that allows you to be effective at your work. So much of what you've just talked about, there's an undercurrent of feelings, emotions, like how am I feeling, but also how am I managing those emotions? Because we know that it's both our management of emotions in the way that then allows us to communicate effectively in crisis, but we also know that we're having to manage the emotions of others in constituent categories that also are feeling things very deeply. So the question now then becomes, given that we often tend to lead with emotion in times of crisis, instinctual very often, I mean, as humans. Do you have recommendations, personal, professional, at both an individual and it can also expand into an organizational level, to mitigate, and you've started to hint at this, how do you mitigate falling prey to emotion in a way that will be detrimental down the line? So how do you manage what can be emotional reactions in times of crisis?
Sure. It's a great question. So one, I think people run away from emotion in a way that they don't need to. In general, I think people have gotten it in their head that emotion shows some level of vulnerability or weakness, that they have to be firm, that they have to be cold sometimes in the way that they communicate. And that's just not life, right? We are emotional people, and somebody reads an email emotionally, and it's okay to write an email emotionally. Anybody who tells you that they know how coronavirus is going to how this is going to end or when it is going to end is full of crap, right? They don't know. They may be trying to make people feel comfortable. They may be trying to instill confidence. I get that. But trying to blow things off or trying to be cold in this moment, I think will backfire. So before I explain how to avoid being too emotional, I actually think having emotion is really important. And it's okay to let people be emotional. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be exhausted and to say you're exhausted. I think it shows that you're human, and that actually goes a long way. I've seen different organizations who are laying people off. And the ones that are resonating are the people who are doing a video or are doing a Zoom call or actually doing a phone call, or are not afraid to actually talk to the people they're about to lay off and express their regret and talk about how they feel, versus a dry press release that they read about, they read about it in the news before they actually hear about it, or an email that has no personalization at all. So I actually think it's okay to have a little bit of emotion. That said, there's such a thing as too much emotion. I am pretty hot under the collar. I get frustrated, and I don't always take the 2 minutes that I need to, that I've just counseled is good. And I sometimes end up regretting it. That sometimes is something that I have learned from. I think a crisis, I think an issue of rapid response it's chaotic. It feels like quicksand. You are in a situation and you feel like you cannot get out, and you've made a little screw up, and now it feels like a bigger screw up, and now you're stressed. So you're screwing up even more because now you're stressed and you're hurrying. When I think, for folks who've seen my bio, I worked at the Department of the Interior during the BP oil spill. I was sort of brought over to help get that managed from a communications and a congressional investigation standpoint. And when I started, I thought, man, this is like drinking from a fire hose. Mm-hmm. And it took about 24 hours before I realized it's actually like drinking through a Swiss cheese slice. There's hoses everywhere. There is water or oil coming through every available vehicle. And I am definitely going to miss something. I only have so many appendages. I am not going to be able to stop everything from happening. So part of it was giving myself a break and knowing I couldn't solve everything every day. I tried to find ways to achieve a discrete win. What's something today that I can check off my to-do list that will make me feel validated, that will show progress, because there's going to be 18 things I can't get to today. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And I have been saying that since Deepwater Horizon, but I really believe it even now. We are all in this, and we don't really know how long this is going to take, right? What this new normal looks like. And so sprinting is going to be exhausting. You're going to wear yourself out. You're not going to have anything left 2 weeks from now, when we're still, many of us, working from home and wearing masks and dealing with loved ones who might be sick. So one of the things that when I first started teaching, I like acronyms, and I wanted to find an acronym that I could use to sort of teach students about what you do when you're up a creek without a paddle. Which Alexis Holzer taught me to say, because I used to use bad words when I talked about it instead. So when something bad has happened, when you are up a creek without a paddle, what do you do? What are sort of those first steps? And so I created the acronym STAMINA, validating this idea of it being a marathon, not a sprint, right? You need, if you're going to be an effective crisis communicator, if you're going to deal with rapid response needs quickly, you've got to be in it for the long haul. And what STAMINA stands for, and I apologize that this is going to be long, but so S is stop for a minute. And T is take a breath. And it's hard to imagine that out of 7 letters, I had to look down, seven letters, 2 of them are literally about breathing. But the truth is, and this goes back to mindfulness, we're not good if we are immediately reacting. When a new client calls and is in trouble and asks for help, I almost never react while I'm on the phone, other than to say, I'm so sorry this is happening. I think I can help. Let me take let me take a half an hour and just process this a little bit and let me call you back. If that's not good for them, then we're probably not going to have a good working relationship, because I need to know that I can take a second with no phone calls and nobody in my ear and actually get centered and figure out how I'm going to be able to give them a path forward. I have a friend who worked in outdoor recreation for years, and her mantra was always, if somebody gets hurt, stop and smoke a cigarette. Now, she's never smoked a cigarette in her life, but this idea was, in the couple of minutes it could take, and I'm not encouraging anyone to take up smoking, but in the couple of minutes it takes to smoke a cigarette, you sort of forced, she was forcing herself to think about, what do I need to do? What are those 3 minutes when I'm not tending to someone urgently, where I can really put some thought into what are my immediate next steps? So S is stop for a minute. T is take a breath. A is analyze the situation. What do I know and what do I not know? What do I still need to know? There's so much going on. Is press calling? Do I need to start having somebody answer calls? Do I need to start tracking what's going on? Are there ads that are really tone deaf that are scheduled to run on our Facebook or on this client's Facebook in the next 3 hours? Like, what are the things we have to stop right now so that I can get control of the situation? M is manage expectations. I sometimes have people say, well, how long will this take to fix? And the truth is, if I don't know all the information, even if I do know all the information, but certainly if I don't know all the information, I don't necessarily know what this is going to look like. I can manage expectations by saying, I think we should do these 3 steps. And if we do, here's what I think our outcome is going to be. And I can try and create a roadmap that both sets expectations for me that they can, judge me by, but also is a realistic way to say to someone, this is how I think this is going to go. Let me give you this is going to not go away today, but I think it's going to go away next week. And let's talk about that. I is insist on coordination. Nothing makes me crazier than a well thought out crisis response plan and then to find out that somebody in the organization took a press call, was tweeting, was sending emails out to people totally off message, actually sometimes contradicting what we had all agreed to say. So insisting on coordination for me is about who's the point of contact, who needs talking points, right? How are we messaging this? I don't want leaks. I don't want sort of loose cannons. Even people with the best of intentions can sometimes do harm when they're trying to help. So I think that's really important. N is negotiate resources. What do I have? Who can I ask to work on the weekends? Who is available at night? How many people have access to the Twitter accounts? Right? How do we get a hold of the CEO in a way that's not going to take me 6 hours? So what are the things I need to know so that I can channel the best resources this organization may have? And the last is assess and repeat, which I actually think is the most important. And you'll forgive me, Anita, I'm going to run through all of these one more time, not the detail, but just so folks get it.
Absolutely.
And assess and repeat, I think, is really important, because if you're like me, you're go, go, go all the time. And if you don't stop, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes, to figure out, what did we do today? Like, how did that go?
Yeah.
Did it go well? Did it not go well? What should we do differently next time? You forget it. I've never had a child, but I understand that part of childbirth is that you completely forget part of what you've gone through, or you would never have a child again. And that's the joke that people often say, if you remember what it was like. I actually think the same is true for crisis. People don't remember how awful it was even a week later. Sometimes people are like, it wasn't that bad. Really? You were crying and I had to talk to your wife before you all went to bed. So sometimes assessing and repeating, whether you do it with a client or whether you do it just with your team, becomes really valuable. And part of that means creating a space where your staff can give you criticism, where you can be vulnerable, where you can say to someone, we shouldn't have done this press event. Nobody showed up and I should have been more vocal because I didn't think anyone was going to show up. And next time, let's think about how to make a press event where people do show up. So stop for a minute, take a breath, analyze the situation, manage expectations, insist on coordination, negotiate resources, assess, and repeat. I think that's a really important, everyone may have different ways, but to me, that's a really important framework to approach these kinds of issues.
Absolutely. And you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking the applicability at an organizational, institutional level, absolutely. But I'm even thinking as an individual, it would be helpful to walk myself through your acronym when I'm encountering something. It could be professional, it could be personal, it could be some blend. But I think that's what one of the things that I've always felt is exciting about your approach to actually breaking it down in an acronym that not only has meaning as a word, stamina, as you said, marathon, not sprint, but that one can use individually and one can apply organizationally, because these are best practices that bridge those two worlds. And given the fact, I think today we are straddling the professional and the personal in ways we didn't expect, because I am conducting this from my kitchen and I'm looking over at my stove at what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. And so there's a blurring that we're experiencing right now that I think is creating a more charged atmosphere of managing who we are as professionals and who we are as people. So yeah. I appreciate you walking through that so well. And moving then from that, because this is a framework you've been working with for years. You know, this is something you've designed. It's something that you've shared in your consulting work. So the question now is, how are things either the same or different because in this particular crisis?
You know, I when I came through the thought exchange, I sort of laughed because in many ways, it's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a great answer, because the truth is, I'm not sure things completely have changed.
And I should be clear, like, I'm sorry, I should be clear. The question was like around crisis comms, like how you manage crisis comms, like not like how are things different in the world? Obviously things are very,
well, yes.
I realized I left out a little modifier there. How are things in terms of crisis communications or this particular crisis and the way that you approach it?
Sure.
So basically, like, does stamina work for this? And please.
Yeah, so I would say yes and no, right? Useless answer, but I'll explain why. I think that in many ways, things are not different. How we approach the need for rapid response, how we deal with issues of crisis. There are lots of things happening in the world that don't revolve around coronavirus right now. It's hard to imagine because it's what we're all like living and breathing with, but there are other news things that are happening every single day that are a crisis for somebody. Our crisis.
You've had a busy week.
Right. Yes. Right. I have issues that are in the national news that have nothing to do with coronavirus right now. Okay. So in one way, I think stamina always works, but even if stamina doesn't work for you and there's something else that works for you, that same method of being thoughtful about when you are engaging and how you are engaging, I think is very important. In terms of what has changed, I think the issue of relevance has made a big difference. And what I mean by that is, a reporter might have cared about this a week ago, or excuse me, 2 months ago. Do they care about it now? You know, the bandwidth that reporters may have in particular is there's much less bandwidth. The flip side is there's a lot of people sitting in front of their computers right now. So actually the appetite for social media engagement, I think, is actually increased significantly. And so people are thinking right now about how to shift the way they communicate, the way they talk, to sort of reflect that, right? There's less chance a reporter's going to cover you. There's more chance somebody's going to see something that you posted on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, and might react to it. There's an increased opportunity to engage with people emotionally in a way that there just wasn't in February. It's just different. But I also still think, so when I talk about relevance, and I mentioned sort of personal brand, when you get asked to pitch something that isn't relevant, when you are sort of struggling with the relevance of it, and I've said this a lot, I feel like this week, when someone's asking you to put a square peg into a round hole, you have to resist using this moment to try and connect coronavirus to every single thing you're working on, because you think that will make it relevant. Reporters are paying attention. Everyone's paying attention, right? And so people are noticing that. So somebody who's suddenly suggesting that a diesel truck is not appropriate during coronavirus, and so people should be investing in clean cars, is not really the right pitch. That doesn't mean you can't talk about clean cars. It doesn't mean you can't talk about the importance of climate change. And there are actually, I've spent a lot of time putting coronavirus and climate change together. But it's a sort of off-brand sort of move that somebody thought was a good idea because they were trying to connect these. The other thing I will say, and I have seen examples, again, good and bad. But the other thing I will say with my advocacy hat on is that we all still have a role to play to hold people accountable. I think there's this idea that because we are in this scary time, that everything is, that there are no rules, and personally and professionally. And I actually think we still really do have an obligation to hold people accountable and to make the case to the public or to reporters about why that's important. And that means everything from political leadership to organizations that overstep, to consumers who are being incredibly inappropriate, people not wearing masks when they should be, and people who are abusing this moment. So I think people should feel okay personally having a reaction to that, even as we're trying to be safe and we're trying to be really thoughtful.
Yeah. I have a question that I'll ask, but I wanted to give a heads out to the crowd that we'll be moving to hearing from all of you that have questions. So please start to propagate the chat box if you haven't already. But I have a final question for this part of the talk that I'll ask, and it builds off of that, Melissa. In terms of some of those best practices, you alluded that you've seen some good examples, you've seen some examples that might be less good. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about expand a bit more on those best practices for communicating in this time. And if you have some examples you might want to share that you feel would be illuminating, this would be something I'm sure people would love to hear from you.
Sure. Forgive me one second. I have a whimpering puppy that just needs to leave my office. Come here. Out.
I thought I heard her.
Sorry. Not that having a whimpering puppy on camera is not awesome. Sorry about that. So why don't I'll tell you a few examples as people are thinking about the chat, and then I'll tell you about some best practices. So Giving Tuesday Now was created as an online fundraiser. So let me back up. Giving Tuesday is an annual event in December. It's a way to sort of piggyback off of different opportunities of gratitude and Black Friday and Small Business Sunday, all of those different things. Giving Tuesday was created as part of that. And someone decided to create Giving Tuesday Now, which was May 5th, and was a specific opportunity to raise money for organizations directly dealing with coronavirus in some way, shape, or form, helping people, helping everything from medical professionals to people who are trying to get PPE in the right direction, to people dealing with domestic violence survivors, to people doing online education. And I was mortified by the amount of emails I got from people who had nothing to do with any of those things trying to take this moment to fundraise. I thought that was incredibly tone deaf and seemed opportunistic. It actually affected how I felt about the brand. VRBO and Airbnb are two. I'm not talking about any of my own clients, by the way. VRBO and Airbnb are, of course, home rental companies, home rental apps and organizations. And both have seen a lot of cancellations, a lot of people who are struggling right now who can't travel, even if they wanted to the place they were supposed to go. Airbnb took a lot of steps to say, no penalties. Like, if you can cancel and you can work it out with the other person on the other end, you'll pay no fees from us. VRBO isn't doing that. VRBO is maintaining that fee, and they're competitors. And I had an Airbnb and I had a VRBO, and moving forward, that will impact how I think about which one I go to. Now, ironically, even though they said they were keeping it, I got an email days later that they've changed their mind and now they're refunding it. But now you've pissed me off. Like, changing your mind later doesn't change my gut reaction. Similarly, Frontier Airlines made a lot of news this week because they started charging people a social distancing fee. So they were charging a fee that allowed you to buy the middle seat on a plane so that you didn't have someone next to you. So you could be on either the window or the aisle. Now it was like $35, $40, but it doesn't matter. It was still a fee for doing something they should be suggesting, recommending anyway. Now they've already, as my father pointed out to me, because he caught it before I did, they've already reversed that. But the damage is done. This is what happens with the 24-hour news cycle. They were all over CNN and Fox and MSNBC for this plan. And then when they reversed, CNN and MSNBC and Fox are onto their next scandal. Like, they're not covering that anymore. I think that there are celebrities, very well-meaning celebrities, who are posting messages and trying to be encouraging. But for any of you who are Madonna fans, in the very beginning of coronavirus, she did a video from her bathtub. She did a video of her mansion, and it fell flat because the truth is you had a lot of people not living in mansions, not hanging out in their bathtubs, going, thanks, but no thanks. Like, this seems obnoxious to me. You know, she was, I think she was genuinely trying to do the right thing. She was trying to do something kind, but it landed really flat. So my long answer to Anita's short question, best practices. So let me just do that, and then we'll take questions. One is that you should be making sure your website is telling your story right now. Your website is where people are going to learn about you. You can't engage with people in the way you used to. It's just, and I'm used to working from home, and I can't engage with people the way I'm used to. So make sure that your website either it doesn't have to reference coronavirus. If you're working on something related to coronavirus, say it. If the office is closed and you really can't respond to people, it's okay to bring a slider, to bring some window up that says, we hope you're taking care of yourself. Our family is taking care of itself. If we're slow to respond, here's why. Right? That's okay to do, but that's a place that people are going to. And I think people are leaving that tool unused in a way that is not effective. Ensure that your staff know what your expectations of them are, or that your colleagues know what their expectations are, that people know what to say about what your organization is doing during this time. Because whether you like it or not, your board of directors, your staff, they're going to talk. So you want to make sure they sort of know what to say. Have a designated point of contact for media and social media. Who should reporters call? Who is doing the tweeting, the posting? And have a backup, because folks are getting sick. Folks are getting sick, or folks are needing to take a break for self-care. And if they are the only person responsible for these things, that's a tremendous amount of responsibility that's going on their shoulders. That's really unfair if they're actually trying to practice some level of self-care. And the last thing I'll say, and then we will go to, I could talk forever. You know I could talk to you forever, Anita. The last thing I'll say.
Actually, Melissa, before you finish that thought, I just want to remind folks, and just to clarify, please do put your questions in the chat box. Our Zoom DJ, Mo, will be asking the questions, and so it would be wonderful if you would type your questions into the chat box. We know you have them, and we will get to as many as we possibly can during the balance of our time. So the chat box is in the lower portion of your screen in that toolbar. You can just type your question in there, and Mo will take care of it. So just want to put that PSA out there again. Please continue, Melissa.
No, awesome. So the last thing is, have a plan for social media engagement. In particular, that should be the easiest step for all of us, right? You can do that from your computer. Customers and supporters and members are loyal to your organization until they're convinced not to be. So a key to sort of maintaining these relationships is keeping folks engaged. Worst case scenario, you've had an opportunity and a platform to continue promoting your message. That's the worst that can sort of happen, right? But the best case scenario is you're actually building brand. And some of those, I'll take another minute and a half while we get people posting their questions.
I already have another follow-up question.
I work with a firm called Trilogy Interactive, which is digital. They're better than me, which is why I hire them to do digital strategy. And I'm going to borrow a couple of guidance pieces, recommendations that they created for me to share with clients, because I thought they'd be really helpful. Find opportunities to connect with individuals who are talking about your issues on social media. Even if you have a policy of not liking or commenting or sharing as part of the way you moderate social media, think about being flexible on that. Start replying to people, right? Allow yourself some interaction with the human being on the other end of the account, particularly people who have high followers, right? Who have a high amount of people who are paying attention to what they say. Entertain people. It's okay to be fun, right? Find ways to share positive wins. I have a client, we put out a coloring book for parents and their kids to have at home to talk about Earth Day. We're just trying to find fun things. I have clients who are doing sort of your moment of Zen. And once a week, they're posting something silly or something fun that just tries to get everybody to have a little bit of a breather. I will say that if you have money for paid social media, Facebook is seeing an incredible rate of return right now. I cannot recommend it enough, and I'm not taking make no commission off this recommendation. Retailers are largely pulling out of advertising online because they're trying to either deal with their bottom line or be more sensitive to the time that we're in. So in particular, I'm seeing nonprofits getting a crazy rate of return, 50 cents per cost per acquisition. So 50 cents to get someone to follow your account. And you're really seeing, I have a stat, Facebook actually saw a 70% increase in March. That's crazy. So that definitely changes how I've worked. And I think it should also change how other people work. And the last thing I'll say is, don't feel like you have to apologize for having an issue that doesn't focus on coronavirus. Sometimes you see people go, I'm sorry to do this now, but it's okay. Like the world is still churning. Things are still happening. It's okay to flag things for people. Some people want to talk about anything but coronavirus. And so posting about something that you're working on gives them an opportunity to do that. There's still things to sell. There's still advocacy to be done. There's still connections to be made and public education to do. So don't feel like you cannot do that. Okay, now I'll stop and shift.
No, we don't want you to stop, Melissa. We want you to keep going. I realized as you were talking, I had one more question that I want to pose before we go to the chat box, and thank you folks for the ones that have sent in questions, and please continue. So Melissa, we've been talking a fair amount this week. We've been connecting to prepare for this evening and to touch base and talking about summer quarter, whole 9 yards. And I know there was one day I called you and I just said, it's catching up to me today. Like I just had a crazy bureaucratic conversation. My fuse is about this long. So I just want to acknowledge that these are fantastic recommendations at the organizational level, but I'm going to bring it back to the personal again, because I want to know, what are you doing for your own self-care?
You didn't warn me about that question, Anita. I'm much easier, it's much easier said than done with me, just to be very clear. What am I doing for self-care? I'm not doing enough. Right? It's 9 o'clock on a Friday and I'm talking to all of you wonderful people. I am, one thing I am doing, I was like, there's two things I'm doing. One is I'm trying to get out and walk at least an hour a day. I am on wall-to-wall calls, and Zoom has actually had, it's actually, for me, has almost made me less productive because I can't be doing other things while I'm Zooming. And sometimes that's, for those of us who are on conference calls nonstop, it's actually really helpful to be able to multitask just a little bit. So I am often taking calls while I'm walking my dog. And I just have to tell someone I'm not able to join my video, and being okay with building that boundary for myself so that I can actually get outside and breathe a little bit, and just stretch my legs, because otherwise I'm sitting in a chair easily for 8 or 9 hours. The other thing I will say, even though I'm totally zoomed out, is I'm trying really hard at least once a day to FaceTime or Zoom or Google Hangout a friend. Normally I'm looking out for the people, I'm thinking about the people who I think need it most, which in many ways is actually like, I need to be able to feel like I'm helping someone. So it's got a dual purpose. I can't say it's always without alcohol in my hand, but it's a way to like wind down my night. So oftentimes, I'm on the East Coast, oftentimes after dinner, I will give myself an hour to catch up with somebody. And that becomes a little fun. It lets me unwind a little bit and just connect with people in different ways, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah. I heard a wonderful quote last night that one of the easiest ways to reduce anxiety is to think of other people and how you can help them. And it's a way of transferring anxiety you might have, and what a good thing to be doing now, because there's always going to be someone in our social and professional circle that would benefit from help. And help could be everything from a cheerful email to showing up with takeout to, as you say, having just a call where you touch base. So I appreciate you coming full circle with me on that. I want to hear now from Mo. Do we have some questions that are in line in the chat box that would be good to start posing to Melissa?
Absolutely, we have lots of questions. Thank you everybody for asking. So the first one is, how should political campaigns handle fundraising right now? Is it tacky to be reaching out? And if it is, when would be a good time?
I do not think it is tacky. This goes into that category of like, the world has to go on. I guarantee you the other side is fundraising. Whatever side you're on, the other side is fundraising. So I think actually the best thing for political campaigns right now across the board, whether it's presidential, whether it's gubernatorial, whether it's local, is you got to stay front of mind. You have to stay visible. I have a girlfriend who's running for a statewide position, and she has had challenges fundraising because she feels like it, early on she felt like it was tone deaf, but instead she was doing tons of Zooms. She was organizing Zooms by different constituency. And part of that is what people in the fundraising world call sustaining, right? If somebody's a monthly giver, or if somebody's given more than once, you need them to stay giving. You don't want to lose them. And if you are working a campaign, you don't want to lose their vote. So to me, part of this is, what is your brand worth? And you should be spending some time, even if it feels like there's no money transacting, investing in keeping those relationships going. From a fundraising perspective, I think most people have found a way to make this about coronavirus, to be candid with you. And I think that's what folks are kind of expecting. But at the end of the day, there's still an election coming up. So so for example, some campaigns have said, while we are all worried about our friends and loved ones, my opponent is doing blank, blank, and blank. Please chip in $5 to help me so that I don't have to stand on the corner with a coffee mug in my hand, collecting dollars, right? So I think there are creative ways, but I do not think that holding back on fundraising right now is smart for folks. I just think you have to be careful about how you're doing it. So I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder that people can feel free to either put your questions in the chat with everybody, or you can privately message me. And either way, I will read it out loud. Great, so our next question is, what are your thoughts about how to communicate a crisis within a crisis?
Without an example, that's a little hard for me. Give me a second. A crisis within a crisis. Mo, I don't know if we can go to the next one and that person can give us just a little bit of context. I could make it up, but I'm not sure I will be answering what that person actually wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm making more work for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally. So the next question is, there is so much speculation about the return to normal, as most organizations have had to put their regular comms plans or campaigns on pause. How are you responding to clients who are asking when it may be okay to tactfully resume?
I'm a crisis communicator. So for me, I plan for the worst, always, in my life, as people will tell you, but also in work. I think that if I plan for the worst, then I'm prepared. Then nobody can sort of surprise me. For example, when people have asked, I live by myself, and people have said, well, what's going to happen if you get sick, and who's going to take care of you, if you get coronavirus? And I have said to some people, which does not work for everyone, I'm assuming I'm going to get it. It is less scary for me to assume that I could get sick. That doesn't mean I'm running out there licking, street poles or not wearing my mask or anything else. But it means I have chicken soup, and I have vitamin C, and I have Mucinex. I have all the things that people are saying you need. I have people that I can call, but it is less scary for me to know that I can handle it if it happens. I think any client who's asked me when I think they can return to normal, I have sort of said that I don't think there is a normal right now. I don't know when there's going to be a normal, so let's stop pretending that there's going to be a normal. Let's plan for right now. So I have clients, for example, we've built 3-month plans, because in 3 months, we're all going to be living this still. Whether or not every state is open and people are back to work, Dr. Fauci has told us coronavirus is going to be around for a while. So I have encouraged clients to think, okay, so let's look at that 3-month plan. In the age of coronavirus, how are we going to do things differently? A lot of my work is reactive to things that are happening on Capitol Hill, reactive to things that elected officials are doing. But the elected officials aren't really doing the things that I react to because they're dealing with coronavirus. So I've had to be very creative in thinking about how to be proactive in a way that I haven't always been. The other thing that I will say is that every organization, and certainly if you've taken my class, should have a comms plan anyway. They should have a way that they regularly engaging their stakeholders, their consumers, their staff, their funders, which I think people are sometimes forgetting, their governing bodies like their boards of directors. Just because we're in a crisis of sorts doesn't mean you shouldn't still be communicating with all those people. You absolutely should. You can be a little bit more flexible, right? So it may just be as easy as a weekly roundup. Here's what we're doing. We're working hard from home. Here's how we're delivering for you. That doesn't mean that that first week when things started shutting down, I swear to God, every organization that had my email address that I'd ever used before was telling me what they were going to do during coronavirus. And I stopped reading because I love you, Target, but I don't need to know what you're doing, nor do I need a rental car agency telling me what I'm doing. I mean, it got excessive. So I think there's a good balance. There's a balance that has to be struck, but people should not abandon their communications plans and the principles by which they were communicating with people before. I think it's as important now as it ever was.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is, what has most impressed you about the White House Coronavirus Task Force, and what has least impressed you?
I try very hard not to be political with everything calmly. No, but it's a good question. What has most impressed me? I'm a big fan of Tony Fauci. I interacted with him a bit when I worked in the Senate. I'm talking about Dr. Tony Fauci, who is the head of NIH. And he's the guy, if you don't know who Tony Fauci is, you haven't turned on a TV or opened a computer in 2 months. I think that working in this administration is really hard. And I think being part of this response is really challenging. And I think he has maintained his personal integrity and his personal brand better than anyone else on that team, and really to impressive lengths. He's not afraid to be honest. He's appropriate. So he couches the way he talks about things. I think he can in some ways, because I don't think the president could credibly fire him right now and not inherit an avalanche of problems. But I also think Dr. Fauci is becoming increasingly aware of the impact he's having on people. So there was a meme, I thought it was funny, but there was a meme that went around early on when there were daily briefings that were happening. And as the president's talking, you see Dr. Fauci start doing this, standing behind him, and start like moving his face. And it was funny, but it wasn't really appropriate, right? That wasn't a good way of expressing himself. So he's actually adjusted just enough that he is maintaining his personal brand, but he's not giving us as many cues as I think some of us want, but is appropriate. In terms of what I am dismayed about, or what I thought has been good and what I thought has been bad, I think facts should matter. I think the science should lead. I don't think this should be a political conversation. And I think that is what the task force fell into pretty consistently. I think that president's got to run for re-election, and this was an opportunity for him to be on TV every night. But I think it kept people like me from watching. I got what I needed from Twitter. I really wanted to hear from Dr. Fauci, but I didn't want to hear him enough to watch a political rally. And I think that really detracted and didn't help, didn't help the country as we were desperate for information.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, how do you approach how to measure efficiency of crisis communication?
That's a good question. I keep saying that. They're all good questions. How do I measure efficiency? My job in crisis is generally to get us off the news. That's my job. That is the first and foremost thing that I'm not trying to solve the crisis more often than not. I'm the communicator. I'm not necessarily the lawyer or the regulator or the manufacturer of the thing that is breaking. I'm trying to get us off the news, because trying to manage a crisis with reporters calling is really hard. It is a whole lot easier when there isn't a spotlight on you. So I measure efficiency by media clips in many ways, not the size of them, but the tone of them. There are some outlets, you could probably guess based on my background, there's some outlets where I don't really care what they say. I exclude political commentators who are going to say what they want to say anyway. But if I'm finding that network news, for example, or mainstream publications are not getting it, are not getting the message I'm trying to portray, then I'm not doing my job well enough. And then I try to shape that the one thing that I definitely do not do and would caution everyone to do is I don't use social media to gauge my efficiency. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look and see, am I losing people? Are we losing followers because we're posting too much? Are people getting really upset? Was our tone off? That's one thing. But I think if you give too much power to comments in social media, you allow trolls, which I like to describe as like the 300-pound guy who's in his boxer shorts living in his mother's basement. You give them too much power. And for example, some of the national folks that I've worked for, I tell them not to look at the mentions, and I try not to look at the mentions, because you're getting a lot more negative mentions than good, and it can really affect morale and how you feel personally. And I just don't think it's a good arbiter. So that's one in particular that I try not to use in any way to sort of gauge what I think is effective.
Awesome, thank you. Up next, we have, moving forward after this situation, do you think organizations will be more intentional in having a communications or media-specific staff, or building them out more strategically?
God, I hope so. I really hope so. But I'm not confident that they will. And here's why I say that. I got laid off once, and I got laid off never like having been the highest performer of the staff. But I got laid off because the CEO said, we can't make the bottom line. Like we're having a budget problem, and we are going to lay off 2 of our directors. And so they decided to lay me off and to lay the membership director off, because they decided that the operations director needed to stay on to deal with HR, and the program director needed to stay on because if you didn't have any programs, nothing else was going to work. And I actually think that's obviously I thought it was the wrong call because I got laid off, but in general, I actually feel like communications and marketing staff are the first to get cut. And I think it's a terrible idea. I think that they still aren't appreciated enough. You can do all the good work in the world, but if you're not getting press, the world isn't knowing about it, right? Like it's not translating. So while I think it's so important, I worry that as people are building back their staff, they're still going to think that the communications staff is like the icing on the cake, instead of being such a critical part of the team. And my former students know this. That's why I think even now it's incumbent on communicators to show their value, to actively participate in calls, to come to meetings ready to make suggestions, not just listening, not just being reactive. We have to show all of the things we're thinking about. If I hear a morsel of an idea, I'm going to come back with 3 strategies of communications we can do around it. I work with one of my former students on a client, and I don't even know, every idea we give them, they think is brilliant and then don't do. But that's okay, because they think we're brilliant. And that's part of the problem. Like, that's part of the goal, right? You think I'm brilliant, you're not going to fire me. That's part of the goal. Would I like them to implement some of our ideas? Absolutely. But I also need them to see my value. And so I think we all have that responsibility to make sure people are seeing and understanding, appreciating our value.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, corporate social responsibility messages are flooding the marketplace. What are specific best practices for companies to lead that conversation, and those that are entering into it a little too late?
I know we're recording. I have a challenging relationship with corporate social responsibility. How's that for spin? And for anyone who doesn't know, so the idea of corporate social responsibility are corporations, big corporations, that are dedicating some people or some money to initiatives that are feel good. And that's not the way they would articulate it, but are giving back to the community, are part of being public citizens and part of their community. The reason I say I have a challenging relationship with them is that in crisis, I often see people use corporate responsibility as a Band-Aid to pretend the thing they didn't happen. There are some wonderful corporate social responsibility programs that I think are wonderful and wonderful uses of resources. But my gut reaction, because I'm spent 20 years in this field and so I'm a little skeptical, is what did they do? What did they do wrong? Right? It's like when a child is really good and you're like, you must have done something wrong to be this sweet. What's going to happen when I leave the room and go into the living room, right? So that's the way I sometimes react to corporate social responsibility. I don't think there's ever a time to come in too late. I don't buy that argument. I think there's never a too late a time to get engaged and show your value to people. And people should not feel discouraged that they're in it too late. And honestly, we don't know how long this is going to go. So we could be in the middle. I don't want to scare anybody. But like, I don't know when the end is, so I don't know that this is too late. In terms of best practices for corporate social responsibility, I think it really has to be not about the organization. I think that becomes really important. So it's really got to be about the entity that you are giving to, that you are donating to. And part of that plays out in how you talk about it. So for example, if you're giving donations to organizations, are you talking more about yourself and your commitment to the issue, or are you talking about them and why you are giving to them? Are you giving anonymously? Are you making resources available on your website so that other people can give? Right? Are you putting your money where your mouth is? And I think that becomes really important. Having the corporate social responsibility should not be a one-off. There should be an actual plan that shows some continuity and commitment to an issue. I feel like my volume has gotten louder. I apologize. There's a thunderstorm happening outside my window.
You're doing great.
Well, thank you. Our next question is, are there differences in approaches and strategies for corporations and small businesses who are eager to reopen soon?
Yes, but I'm not sure there should be. And let me explain why I say that. Everybody is struggling right now, but I feel like small businesses have people have more have people's faith on their side. When you have a small business and they're a mom and pop shop that has 10 employees, and they're saying, please, we're doing takeout. You know, anything you can do to help our community, we'd be so grateful. We have 10 employees and we love them all, and we're really trying to be able to still pay for their health insurance right now, let alone not lay them off. That resonates differently than a global company. You saw this with there was a congressional bill that gave money to small businesses, and you saw big companies get that money and then face tremendous backlash. Now, at the end of the day, that company needs help too, but they don't have they don't have those relationships emotionally that they can sort of play in. So I actually think that corporations could do a better job of taking a lesson or an example from small businesses, finding a way to humanize what they're doing. The big companies are laying lots of people off. That's still affecting those individuals. It may not affect the billionaire at the top, and that's what the media is covering, but it's still affecting the little guys. And so trying to find ways to talk like you're a small business. I think the CEOs and board members who have given of their own salaries is a really important step. So what I mean by that is people who've said, we are going to take a 50% cut for this year. I've seen that with some universities, actually. There's not UW, but there's another university that I'm affiliated with where leadership has started to take a cut, and they've tried to make it so that faculty haven't or won't need to. I think that's a big step, and it's a big, huge organization, but it's showing somebody's commitment, and it sort of gives you that personal touch. I hope that answers.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, a lot of events this spring were canceled, but now organizations are starting to think about events they normally have in the fall. How do communicators start to prepare and communicate around those events?
So the one thing I will say is, if you're going to reschedule, you should be really sure of the new date. I think that some folks have thought we need to offer stability now. As Anita will attest, I was texting her or emailing her or calling her, I don't know, once a week. I was thinking about it like 3 times a week to find out what was going to happen with summer quarter. Because I was traveling from Washington, D.C. I was going to be in Seattle for the summer. So if the semester was going to shift, if the quarter was going to shift, if it was going to go online, it was going to make a huge difference for me. And Anita was trying to give me the best information she had, but she didn't necessarily know. And I truly believe that UW was giving her the best information as soon as they had made decisions. So I say that because even though you want to give people finality and you want them to have some level of something to look forward to, if you pull the rug out from under them again, you're going to lose that brand, you're going to lose part of your brand recognition. They're going to go, well, I'm not going to buy a ticket again because who knows if this is actually going to happen again. So I think it's really important to be very sure that something is actually going to happen. One alternative might be, we hope to bring this back in October. Watch this space. Since we have 6 months or however many months we got, so we have 4 months to plan for doing this again in October, this gives us a chance to say, what do you want to see different? Or what were you most looking forward to? Because we want to make sure we focus on that, right? So you can find a way to sort of engage people and get them excited without giving them a firm date. Because I do think, as Dr. Fauci has said, this could we could go back to normal, and then we could find that we need to quarantine again in the fall. We really don't know. And so like I said this at the beginning, anybody who tells you they know how this is going to finish off is not being honest. And I think being honest and transparent and our integrity is all we have in these moments when we need people to trust and believe what we're saying.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, in your experience, how are NGOs fundraising during times of a crisis, such as social justice advocates, one example being women empowerment?
Would you mind, I'm so sorry, Mo, would you mind saying that one more time? Somebody just came to get my dog and I totally got distracted, and I apologize for that. Would you mind repeating it?
Absolutely. In your experience, how are NGOs fundraising during times of a crisis, such as social justice advocates, and one example being women empowerment?
How are they doing, or are they doing it well? How they're doing it is, so as I mentioned, right, Giving Tuesday Now was an opportunity on May 5th that a lot of people took advantage of. I think for the nonprofits I work for, we are treading very lightly on fundraising, and we are really focused on sustaining, right? As I mentioned before, focused on what can we, that doesn't mean we remove the donate now button. It means we're not making hard asks. I do think that there is something to be said for everyone is struggling right now. And it's okay to say to your list, we hate to do this to you now. We know that donating to blank is probably the last thing on your mind, but we have to be ready to open back our doors, or the work is continued. A lot of the work I'm working on, a lot of the things I'm working on are still happening. There's still a lot that is occurring, and people are just working from home. So one idea that we've employed with some clients is, let's talk about what we're doing. I'm working from home, but here's how I'm still fighting for you. Here's how I'm making sure that the dollars you have given to us are being well spent. And I think that is okay. I also think that relying on lower dollar donors right now, lower dollar donations, is a good idea. That doesn't mean that there isn't an option to give more, but I don't know anyone that's sort of starting at $1,000. You're starting at 5, at 10, at 25. And that sort of has a recognition of the time that we're in. And it's okay to talk about coronavirus, even if you're not related to coronavirus, just as a realization of the situation that we're all finding ourselves in.
Great. So our next question, which is somewhat related, is my colleagues and I in the nonprofit sector are experiencing Zoom fundraising event fatigue. Have you come across any other creative fundraising strategies with donors that are not virtual?
No, but as soon as somebody comes up with one, I'd love to know. There's none that I can I'm thinking, before we automatically go to the next question. I will say I'm still getting some mailers, and they're pissing me off, quite frankly, in a way that the emails are not. If someone is still spending money on direct mail, so that's actually like mail you're getting, in your mailbox, that is not just a huge waste of money to me. It just feels tone deaf. An email is free, not always, because the company is paying to send it out sometimes, but that feels more sustaining to me than someone who's actually putting that in my mailbox. I just think that does not make any sense whatsoever. So I haven't seen anything that's not virtual, because I feel like our world is virtual right now. But if anybody has ideas, I'd love to hear about them. Full disclosure, I don't actually do much work in the corporate world, and I don't do much fundraising, but I'm doing my best to sort of address the questions as best I can.
Great. So our next question is, what would be a good crisis communication approach or strategy for a brand or organization in a sector like travel that is struggling and is laying off a lot of employees?
A good communication strategy for that?
Yes.
For some reason I heard fundraising. You said communications, I heard fundraising. A good communication strategy for people who are traveling, or for travel companies. I think the idea, so I'm thinking. So this goes back to, I said it before, but I think it's really important. What's your brand worth? I think that it is really, I'm impressed with the organizations, the hotel chains, the airlines, the vacation, resorts and facilities who are not begging me to book, who are instead saying, we're thinking of you. We're offering full refunds to everyone, right? So we're going to take the hit, but we're refunding because you're that important to us as a member. Here are some fun things to do at home. I actually had a hotel chain send me a whole free exercise series. I don't know if they're trying to tell me something, but it was just nice, right? Like while you're stuck at home, you can't enjoy the hiking and the kayaking and the things that you could do in our beautiful city, in this city. So join it virtually. I saw another one sent a bunch of aquariums. That was kind of fun. So since you can't travel to aquariums, it was 6 different aquariums and it was live cams. So I got to see baby pandas. I got to see penguins. Do I care? Like, does that make me want to pay Wyndham for something or Hilton for something or Southwest Airlines? Not necessarily, but it was fun. It goes back to that entertaining bit, and it sort of warms the heart a little bit. And so I think keeping brand loyalty becomes really important, and right now just has got to be more important than trying to upsell people.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is, do you have any suggestions for those who want to become a crisis communicator?
Run. No, I'm kidding. Do I have any suggestions? Well, for UW students, you should feel free to take my class. I understand that we are full for Anita's happy. I understand we're full this summer quarter, but with any luck, I will continue to be teaching summer quarters. So I recommend that as just a way to get more of my dazzling personality, but also have some time to sort of really deconstruct and spend more time on some of the things that we talked about. I will say that some people, I've had students say, I really want to get into this. How can I get into this? And the truth is, crisis sort of finds you. It is one of those things where you figure out if you're good at it once you've been thrown into the deep end. And I don't know, there aren't really PR firms that are sort of known for crisis. I had some students ask me this early in my career at UW, and I sort of suggested, going into corporate communications is a decent way to need to do, to learn how to do crisis. But the truth is, you never know when it's going to hit. I can tell you categorically that no client I have ever done crisis work for expected they were going to need crisis work. In fact, one in particular said, I hope I never have to talk to you again. And I was like, okay, well, that was a little rough. I don't know that we had to do it that way. And she meant it in jest, but she truly was like, I'm now a pariah because I represent the crisis that she had to go through. So I recommend learning more about it. I recommend spending some time, I'll say this and then I'll shut up and we go to the next question. One of the things that we do in my class that surprisingly has become really popular, and I recommend it to everyone, is as you're watching the news, think about whether or not you were the press officer for the person who's talking, for the company that's in trouble, and try to think about what they did wrong and how you would do it differently. It's useful for my former students. Some of you can't stop doing that now. But even if you aren't a student or aren't one of my students, it gives you a chance to see how somebody's crisis is playing out and think like, if I were them, and don't be stupid isn't the answer, right? If I were them, how could I fix this? What could I do differently? It starts to get your brain thinking in a more analytical and different way. And it gets you to start seeing the crises and seeing, more importantly, how to solve the crises sooner.
Awesome, thank you so much. Our next question is, can you elaborate on how to know if your audience is getting tired of your social media feed? This person is running a social media account and wants to know how to brand value without making the audience feel overloaded by the content.
So I think watching, even though I said, right, I don't take my value from social media comments, I do think from an assessment perspective, it does make sense to see how things are working. I work with a couple actual former students. I work with a student on another client, and they have decided to change social media strategy. And we didn't think that was a good idea, but we don't really have any empirical, we don't have any evidence to tell them we don't think it's a good idea. Our gut said it wasn't a good idea. So we decided to start watching whether we were losing followers, whether we were gaining followers, whether we're gaining comments. I have to be honest, it's doing so well. I can't bear to tell the client that it was an okay idea because I thought it was such a bad idea. But People are really engaging. We're seeing more shares. We're getting a different level of comments. So we're getting a lot of people saying, thank you so much for posting this. Like a level of gratitude that we weren't expecting. On Twitter, there is a phenomenon called ratioing. So you sort of can see when this happens to me sometimes when I am doing something that's not popular, your retweets versus your comments, or your likes versus your comments. And that notion is, if people are commenting, they're generally not with you. Are more people blasting you than are liking your message? It's an easy equation, and it's a good way to sort of see, like, well, was it the tone? Was it the content? Right? What can we do? And the last thing I'll say is you can always message test and through social. So that means this photo did really well, but the messaging didn't work. So maybe we'll use this photo a couple of times on Twitter, but we'll change the messaging to sort of see what resonates with people more. I've had clients where the weekend is actually, pre-COVID, the weekend was the best time of engagement, and now it's not. I think a lot of people are sitting in front of their computers so much that they're unplugging more on the weekends than they were before. I'm not sure. I'm not necessarily doing that, but I think a lot of people are doing that. So you're actually seeing weekend trends come down for some issues, whereas they're like skyrocketing during the workday when we're all supposed to be on Zooms and paying attention. So I think really having an ear to the ground on your followers, seeing what people are posting, and it's okay to also take an opportunity to say, what do you want to hear from us? You know, there's Throwback Thursday and there's Follow Friday, but is there a day that you pick where you want to hear from the people following you about what their favorite post of yours was this month, or what kind of content they want to see? It's okay to do that kind of an audit publicly.
Great. Thank you so much for all your responses. We have our final question.
Okay. I was like, how many more we got?
Yeah, so in the context of news about the talk show host Ellen not paying her staff and other hosts paying theirs during this time, if Ellen happened to change her mind and start paying her staff, do you think she would then have to make a bigger gesture and apology to recover from the backlash?
I mean, it's Ellen. I think that part of I think a crisis is a terrible time to try and build a relationship. I think in general, that work has to be done beforehand. I'm not even talking about coronavirus. I'm saying when you're up a creek without a paddle, whether or not you've built a relationship, I see you, Alexis. The relationships you've built and the trust you've built with people is what you've got to coast on. It's what you've got to rely on to keep people engaged. So I think Ellen has a very strong following, and I think Ellen could do a lot of things and apologize for them and be fine. So I don't think she has to do more. I do think, knowing her, not that I know her personally, but knowing her brand, it feels like there needs to be an opportunity to explain. You know, it can't just be, okay, we said we weren't going to do it, but now we did it and we're just not going to talk about it, right? It's okay to say, we've made a change in our operating, you know, for an organization, for a person. I've heard you. I didn't appreciate how people were going to feel about this. And so now I'm doing it too. Thank you all, my community, for making me a better person. Right? Like, it's a way to let people off the hook for being mad at you and welcome them back. Like, I'm not mad at you. I deserved it. It was good that you flagged it. I really, you know, right? Like, it's a humble way to sort of keep that reputation and the community engaged.
Thank you, Melissa. Now, lean back. Home stretch.
I'm doing great. It's all good. These were great questions. Thank you all.
Oh, they're phenomenal and not surprising because it's...
You were worried we weren't going to have questions.
I was never worried.
I was worried.
You were worried. I was never worried. To be very clear. And one of the excellent ideas that the consultancy had in framing these 5 talks and creating a consistency across them is that they ask each of you that are speaking to end with a call to action. And so that's something you and I have talked about over this week. And I'm going to cede the floor back to you for a wrap-up call to action. And then I've just got a couple announcements to close as we move to the final portion of the talk. But I will turn it back over to you for your call to action, and then we will show our appreciation to you and a couple thank yous and announcements as we close.
Got it. Well, first of all, let me say, thank you for letting me visit with you all. I really appreciate it. It was very much, it was very kind. It was very much an honor to be invited to be the first one to do one of these. So I appreciate it very much, and the team has been wonderful. So thank you to all of you who helped make this possible. Because even if you don't know me, you've now learned that I am long-winded. So of course I don't have one call to action, I have three. Because I think they're different, and it's what I want to leave you with. So one is practice self-care at all costs. If I have not communicated that enough, let me reiterate. These are scary times for all of us. You do not have to be Superman or Supermom or Super Grandmom or Super Dad. We are all human. And if you've got to walk your dog on a Zoom call, walk your dog on a Zoom call. If you've got to take an hour because you're losing your mind and you're not at your best, you've got to take that hour. Book time in your schedule for a fake meeting. Have a meeting with Melissa, right? Make some time to be able to provide self-care. I have a girlfriend who's been taking an hour bath every night and leaving her husband to take care of the kids. And I don't know, an hour bath, I mean, I think I'd still be wrinkled, but the point is, like, she locks the bathroom door, she brings in some wine, and she is not to be bothered. And her partner allows that to happen, right? Gives her space for that. So part of that is providing an opportunity for the people around you to also be able to practice self-care and having some empathy for how other people are feeling. So self-care at all costs. 2, it is okay not to have the answers. I don't even have all the answers, right? There were a couple of questions that Mo asked and I didn't have a good answer, or I didn't have a perfect answer because it was outside of my skill set. We are in unprecedented times. I would suggest you got to lean on partners, lean on colleagues, look for best practices online. Everyone's an expert online. Like, there's lots of best practices out there. If you're a UW student, participate in the social happy hours that are occurring during the weekdays, if for no other reason than just to be able to be with your community. Asking for help does not minimize your value, but making a dumb mistake can, right? So ask the questions and allow yourself to be vulnerable. And then the last, and we've talked about it a bunch, is to rely on the feedback loop, that assess and repeat, the A of my stamina structure. You've got to keep a feedback loop going in this moment. Several of you asked about this, sort of, how do you know if your social media is working? Look at reporter feedback. I'm having to pitch all sorts of weird things, and I'll say to a reporter, is this the dumbest thing you've ever heard, or are you just busy? Like, give me something so that I at least know how to articulate this to the client in some way, shape, or form. Look at your social media metrics. Look at consumer spending and activity, right? Are people still buying? Look at staff engagement and morale. Not every staff person wants to do a Zoom every day. My girlfriend sent me a meme and it was like, I'm being harassed by my boss. No, I didn't do anything fun this weekend. I walked the dog and stayed in the living room. So it's okay to keep checking in with folks to see if what worked a month ago is still working, or if you have to change. Allow yourself to be flexible enough to be nimble, and that's how you're gonna succeed. That's what I got. That's my call to action.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I honestly, I cannot imagine a better person to kick us off. You're a treasured member of the CommLead community. Seattle was lucky to claim you for the time that we did. We're delighted that you're going to return now and again. I'm so appreciative. So really my wrap-up appreciation starts with you. It's 3 hours ahead. You've had a long week. You work hard, I know that, and I've always been so impressed in the grace and the enthusiasm and generosity that you bring to CommLead all the time, in the classroom, in events like this, for me as just a colleague. So thank you so much for doing it again today, and we're just so thrilled to have had you. I'm gonna do the clap like this, since Zoom, if we all unmuted and clapped, it would just be cacophonous.
My mindfulness. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. So gratitude for you, absolutely. But there are other folks that are very much worthy of my gratitude. And so I want to just wrap up with a couple announcements, and Melissa will stick around for just a bit. But first, these are announcements as we finish our first of 5 communication and connection in the time of COVID talks. And The first folks I need to thank are the 5 members of the ComLead COVID Consultancy: Stacy Stewart, Ryan Quigtar, Susan McLaren, Meg Herndon, and especially Evelyn Kuo for her tireless work on all the event management for tonight. Thank you so much, all 5 of you. I also want to thank ComLead student Roger Cowdell for facilitating the thought exchange questions. It was wonderful for me and for Melissa to see those in advance. It's great for us to partner with Thought Exchange, and it allows all of you who joined to begin to think about the topics in advance. So really want to thank Roger for that. And I want to thank ComLead student and Zoom DJ, multimedia tutor Mo Herbert, for her tech support tonight, for excellent question facilitation. Thank you so much, Mo, for that. I also want to thank my colleague Alex Stonehill, our ComLead head of creative strategy, for all his leadership with the COVID consultancy. Thank you for that, Alex. Thank you for being here tonight. As I mentioned, we recorded video tonight. We're going to be sending that capture out early next week. That's going to include a short takeaway from the event tonight and a brief survey, going back to Melissa's idea of assessment. So please keep an eye out for that in your inbox. That'll be coming to you in the beginning of next week. If this is the kind of conversation tonight that appeals to you, consider pursuing a graduate degree with ComLead. You can visit our website and learn more about our program. I think I'm going to see if someone can drop that into the chat box right now. That would be terrific. Please join us next week, same time, actually not, a half an hour earlier at 5 o'clock for a conversation with ComLead faculty member Jay Howard. He's going to present a talk titled Thoughtful Brand Communication in the Time of COVID, moderated by Susan McLaren. And as I said, please note that that talk is going to be at 5 o'clock, not at 5:30.
Could have gone earlier?
Oh, Melissa. I'll be back 2 weeks from now at 5:30 for a conversation with ComLead faculty member and Rumble Media co-founder Carol Schiller. Very much looking forward to that. Talk about another Northeasterner who talks fast. That'll be fun. Melissa is going to remain on here just for a little bit. She is 3 hours ahead of us. She has had a long week. Think of this as a virtual approaching the stage if we were all together, where you have a chance to say hi, maybe ask a question that you didn't get to in chat. And Melissa, there's been a request to see your dog if your dog is feeling better. So I know that your dog's not feeling great, but you've got a lot of pet enthusiasts at ComLead. If your dog is available, that would be lovely. We will stop the recording at the time that we move to this after party. Oh, there, oh, look at you. So this will just be a nice casual get together. Again, thank you to Melissa. So appreciative of the time you've given us tonight. This now wraps the formal portion of our evening. We'll have a nice little gathering here for just a couple minutes,